So we are live today with John Pujol from My Tap Score. I'm super excited to have him share with you, do some myth busting about the quality of your tap water and how to know more and how to rectify it. So first of all, welcome, John. Do you like to go by John or Johnny? What do you prefer?
Johnny.
Okay.
I think Johnny, yeah.
It's more fun.
It's
So
more fun.
I see here you've got a degree, master's degree in water chemistry, engineering of water chemistry. How do you say that correctly?
Yeah, water, usually it begins within like an environmental engineering or a chemistry department. There's like a focus on water or water chemistry, and there's also a focus on like water quality engineering.
Okay.
And I did both. So the kind of water quality engineering and the water chemistry.
Oh, awesome. And you went to school in Berkeley. I think that's where you said earlier you started your business. Was this a student, like an idea like amongst student friends, or how did you start with this?
It's a great question. It's so sloppy in the beginning because you just have a bunch of bad ideas and like wishful thinking. We started actually doing electrochemical treatment technology, the kind of patenting and then installation of like a new type of filter. And this was very like university centric because it's very expensive to develop this type of technology, and all of the R&D involved. We developed it, brought it to the field. It was, installed in Bangladesh and India and was working wonderful. USAID poured quite a bit of money into its application in the developing world for removing arsenic
Hmm.
in particular. And then we started using it in the United States because there's a big arsenic issue and heavy metals issue and especially in rural American drinking water. Something like 60 or 70%. What do I say? I think it's more like 95% of US drinking water systems are considered small. LA is big.
Wow.
So for all these small water systems, all these small towns, like they can't necessarily afford the fancy, expensive technologies for arsenic removal. And because arsenic is the 13th most abundant element in our crust, the soil at the top of the earth, it's also very common in drinking water, especially in the West. It's looking country then for these small water systems that needed, more affordable technology for arsenic removal. And then it just stopped looking like a great business idea simply because it's like really complicated to get any kind of um, like new technology brought into a utility context for
Mm.
a drinking water utility to buy a new technology. It's like it's a very conservative industry. It's very difficult to kind of break in. And we were just a small lab group and didn't have a ton of funding. And we learned early on something very interesting was that we'd go to these towns where they had arsenic issues. We'd spend almost all of our time talking about the actual water quality and translating lab reports at that point just to justify our existence as a treatment solution. But then when we realized how expensive and arduous it was going to be to kind of bring an electrochemistry solution to a utility customer, we said, hey, there's a much easier path and a much more maybe bigger problem, which is that people don't understand their water quality very well. Most people
Mm.
aren't chemists. Most people
No.
aren't, backgrounds in toxicology or engineers. And so you end up just kind of taking everyone's word for it all the time. At about the same point in time, 23andMe was out and about, and you're getting your genetics tested. And this idea of like accessing labs as a consumer was starting to really take off.
Yeah, still is, huh? I'd say.
And it'll probably always take off. I mean, it seems like the most obvious direction. It's like people are taking more control over their own personal functional health. And that's
Yeah.
in all avenues. It's not just I think genetics broke the bubble, but then other forms of at-home testing are taking off massively.
Yeah, and we
And so we
don't
found a need
develop
there.
our, go ahead. Yeah, I just want to share, we don't develop our own tests, but when we started to just offer kind of direct to consumer a la carte testing, that was like a huge hit. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So people want it. I just ordered my own continuous glucose monitor because I'm pretty interested in that. So
Totally.
yeah, I just want to back up. I think it was a great idea to go on.
Yep. So then we learned, listen, water is no exception to this rule. People were very confused about their water quality. Nobody is doing water quality tests. Everyone's just guessing. And in that process of kind of transitioning over, we decided to build our own water testing brand. And maybe more importantly, a framework for making it easier for anyone to do any kind of environmental testing. So for us, it was water quality. It was water quality first. It was like you've got all these labs across the country that do environmental testing. They have, you know, millions and millions of dollars worth of instrumentation, expensive personnel, PhDs, technicians, but access to those labs was really walled off. You know, if you weren't a trained engineer or working for the municipality or some big firm, you couldn't easily buy testing. And there were many reasons for this. I don't necessarily need to get into it now, but like we said, okay, we're going to make it easier for people to buy tests from different labs, different environmental labs. And that took off. And one of the ways it took off was in our own brand of a water test called Tap Score, where we made it very, very easy for the first time for people to buy pretty much any kind of water test. You know, you can test lead and copper. You can test like really complex stuff like PFAS, methamphetamine, pharmaceuticals, dioxanes, the whole spectrum of chemistry, biology, radiochemistry. It's all out there in a lab. There's no reason people at home shouldn't be able to test it. And so kind of that meant building for the first time a kind of network, a software network that connected all these labs into one infrastructure and made it easy for mom and dad back home to like confidently buy one of these tests without having to become a professional, chemist or engineer. You don't have to call up the lab and request the panel and the certification requirements and the sampling methods. And like, you don't, and the lab doesn't want to play that game. You know, parents at home don't want to play that game.
Yeah, people want
so
it
we just
easy.
kind of bridge the gap.
Yeah. So does the water testing you do in your own lab facility or you partner with somebody?
So we don't use any of our own labs. We're just a network. So we connect the dots between certified labs and people who need lab testing.
Okay, and then the water is just one of them. So the one I've heard about. So until I got to know you just now, that was all I knew you did. So okay, that's super interesting. Yeah, and I'm so excited you came on, and I will definitely spread this interview around because I think in the natural health world, whether it's consumers or practitioners, we are concerned about water quality, but we don't really know that much. So usually people are just like, well, what filter should I buy? And that's sort of like leaping forward, right, on the the question. I think you're friends with Laura Adler, who I studied with and know, and she's like, you got to know what's in your water before you know how to treat your water. So I think that's the first piece of education is what's in your water. Where are you? What's the circumstances? And that's as far as I know. I mean, I guess there are local water testing facilities, like county things or whatever, but you're the only one I know who does such a comprehensive offering of so many different things that can be in your water. That's, I think, another myth to bust is like, if you go to your city's water report, it only shows what it has to test for, right? Which seems to be mostly heavy metals. Is that right?
We test everything. So like,
right, I'm just comparing you to like a county water report. Yeah.
So the county will do, it really depends. And that's part of the problem. It's like, there are core requirements, then, from the federal government. Then there are a layer of kind of state requirements. And then there's this kind of local thing that happens where certain things have to adjust over time. Because let's say your water system has like a known issue with PFAS, right? Great example. And so there's extra attention and requirement to do PFAS sampling and testing. Gotcha. This is like a very new concern, but it's not necessarily the town over. Okay. In fact, it's always a little bit different. And so, and then there's this whole question about where are the samples collected? Like, is the sample actually collected at home? in someone's kitchen at their tap, or is it collected, at the reservoir, or is it collected at the water treatment plant? And a lot can happen along that journey. And that's also a big challenge with the data that is made publicly available, is that oftentimes, except for the case of lead and copper, some samples of which are collected in homes, but not many, frightfully few, we really don't know what's coming out at the tap. I want to say, by and large, I think the water utilities across the country do an incredible job. Like, as far as like consistent delivery of a reliable product, for the size of that industry and the complexity of that industry, like, it's an incredibly well-oiled machine. That said, it moves slowly, and our issues are growing quickly in all sorts of weird directions. So it's not very good at adapting. As a result, a lot of people turn to things like bottled water when they really don't need to.
Yeah, would you say the system was kind of set up before so many different contaminants were around, or?
Certainly. I mean, the system was, I think, set up in such a way where, there's so few new regulated contaminants. I might be a little bit wrong, but there's like 1 or 2 in the last 25 years. And yet every year there's thousands of new contaminants. I shouldn't even call them contaminants. There's thousands of new chemicals created by industry. And it takes a long time for the EPA to understand a contaminant in the environment, evaluate it, decide if it's a regulatory concern. Like, is it a health risk? Then can we measure it? Can we filter it out anyway? And if you can't measure it, if you can't filter it out anyway, they're not going to regulate it. So there's all these different considerations towards creating a new contaminant that gets regulated and watched.
Yeah, there aren't that many that really get regulated, unfortunately.
So we just said, listen, let's like skip the kind of the federal state, let's skip the government process. It's doing a good job at, I think, what it's probably the most you can ask for it to do, but there needs to be an at-home family household solution as well. Like, the information of what's actually coming out of the tap water, it's got to be part of the equation here.
Okay.
It can move faster. Like, we can gather samples more quickly. We can get people to buy different tests in different parts of the country and sample in different ways. Like, let's use this kind of citizen science. I don't love the term, but like, let's use the capability of people wanting to protect their own health to understand what's coming out of the taps. And then,
for sure.
Combine data sets, get a sense ultimately of like what's really going on in U.S. tap water.
Yeah, you said different testing in different areas. You sort of implied that. We can maybe take Pamela's question and then give some other examples, because I think people listening will be from different places and different situations. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. But Pamela, maybe you want to say what part of the country you're in, but she says she's in a wildlife corridor and she has wildlife dying from rodenticides. Do you test for this? So I guess in the runoff of the water, Pamela, or in the water supply nearby. Also, there is a nuclear plant nearby that was tied to cancer. Is any testing covering that? And she's in Southern California.
There are a lot of concerns with runoff. Usually runoff, these are like semi-volatile compounds. Trying to think of easy way of explaining them in general. They're all very complicated, right? You can have insecticides, herbicides, pesticides, rodenticides, and they get sprayed for one purpose, but then when the rain comes and they either trickle down into the soil and get into aquifers potentially, or they run off the soil onto the streets and into the reservoirs and the lakes and the streams, there's a cycle there. And if these things don't get metabolized, if they don't get degraded by microbes or the sun or other chemistry, and they don't all, if they persist through, I'll just say some things do, like caffeine, for example, degrades pretty quickly. You'd think we'd have a ton of caffeine in our water. We don't.
From people peeing it out.
Yeah, people peeing it out. Exactly. I mean, there should be caffeine everywhere, and yet, there's small, tiny amounts of caffeine, but it's nothing like you would assume for a country like ours that like lives and breathes caffeine, and that's because caffeine degrades nicely in the environment, and we can trust these natural processes to break it down. Some of these more complex contaminants, chlorofascinone is one of them. There's I think that's a rodenticide. There's plenty of other semi-volatile organic compounds that don't get broken down as easily and can have lasting kind of long-term presence in the environment. PFAS is a great example. We say it's persistent, meaning it doesn't degrade quickly. It stays around for a long time before something can eat it or something can tear it apart. And when these things are persistent and we're spraying them or putting them on our lawns or protect our houses from rodents, and then the rain comes, well, then they end up in the water system. And if the water system isn't prepared for them, they don't get treated. So yeah, we test for all sorts of semi-volatile compounds and volatile compounds. It can be tricky because there are so many. Glyphosate is one that gets a lot of attention.
Certainly.
But for every product like Roundup with glyphosate in it, there's 100 others. So it's difficult to kind of stay on top of that, which is why we depend on a network of labs, because it's not like there's some magical water testing machine where you like put the sample in and it can tell you anything. There are different machines for different types of chemicals. You need different methods and practices to test these different chemicals. So a specific compound will need its own specific method, and that needs to be well understood. And so a researcher at some point sits down and says, here's how we're going to test glyphosate. Here's the process to make sure that we're accurately telling you how much glyphosate is in your water. So for the thousands and thousands of compounds out there, you can imagine they don't all have rigorously determined methods.
Okay.
And the machines are different too. So we have a network of labs that makes it easy for us to always say yes, or almost always say yes, and then find the lab that does specialize in that.
Okay. So, and then, well, I'll just ask the second part of her question. I think she's by a retired nuclear facility. Are there certain things to know about for that type of exposure?
Certainly. I think like the first thing is, there's radiation everywhere on the planet. We are all constantly being hit by radiation. It's natural. It's a form of energy. It's in the universe. It's on the planet. We eat bananas, and bananas have a little bit of extra radiation. You go on the plane, you get hit with more radiation. Nuclear power can condense that radiation, and particularly bad forms of it, like gamma rays. And these different types of radiation, gamma, alpha, and beta, have different qualities. One, their energy intensity is different. Two, some of them can pierce through skin really easily. Others can't. So with a nuclear power plant, you're often less worried about things like radon, which are naturally occurring radioactive elements and what's it called? No, I'm blanking on the word right now. And you're more worried about types of radiation that are not natural, types of radiation that could be much more harmful because of the kind of condensed nature of what a nuclear reactor is, right? It's effectively creating a lot of something. And if that's going out in the wastewater, if it's decommissioned and it wasn't decommissioned properly, and we have issues like this in our own backyard here in the East Bay in Northern California, but it's across the country, it's really difficult to contain radiation. I think we've all seen the movies and TV shows, and so when it does leach into the environment, you can test for it. You can test for it in terms of the type of radiation. You can test for a type of metal. It really depends on the situation and kind of what you think the local exposure is.
Okay. So yeah, I'm going to screen share your website because I think I'm getting the sense of depending where you are, you need a different kind of test. And where I thought it was just more of a menu of how deep you want to go. So maybe you can kind of walk me through the site and just people's options. And we do have a coupon code, which is my last name, which is Danner, for 15% off if you're watching and you want to test. So should I just go to test my water?
Oh yeah. And I'll mention now that we have a pretty cool new website coming out in probably a couple months. The goal here is going to be the same as it will be in the future, which is that come in and the first thing we ask people to do is identify what type of water they have. Is it groundwater from a well? Is it city water from a municipality or a private water system?
Okay.
Are you looking for a very specialized test?
So that would maybe be more like what Pamela was saying. She's worried about a couple things.
And I think if you can look at that. I would go back actually. I wonder for a second, God, you'd think I'd be brilliant at navigating my own website, but I'm really not. I don't use it very often. Scroll down a little bit. Click the radiological collection.
Okay.
Okay, so you have many different types of tests, and it can be tricky. And part of our challenge and what we're always trying to get better at is, and what the new website I think will do a slightly better job of, is matching people up on their own to the right test. What we do now is in the bottom right-hand corner, you can kind of chat with our team, and we have some scientists on staff and some support team on staff to help you pick the right test, because it is kind of complex, especially if on this page, you see things there like radium-228, 229, strontium, deuterium, cesium. These are uncommon. You can click on any one of them, click on the deuterium water tester, and you'll get a description of that particularly specialized test. And I believe this is one you would certainly check if you were concerned about a local leak from a nuclear power plant. I want to make clear that I am not a radiochemist by training, but I've learned a little bit.
So this is just one, but there was like some packages, and you can probably combine different packages as well, just putting them in your cart.
Yep. And the combined packages are combined the way they are. If you go to the very top of the page, you say test my water again. And then you click, city water. So these are combined with the following kind of logic. We're like, okay, if you want just the very basics, plumbing related issues, metals, minerals, general chemistry, you'd click the essential city water test.
Okay.
If you wanted to include organic chemistry, volatiles, chlorine, you jump up to the advanced. And for the extended, it includes radiation and some semi-volatiles like haloacetic acids, which are like more esoteric, less well understood versions of trihalomethanes, which are produced when chlorine is used to disinfect water. So one, not everyone can spend $600 on a water test. Two, not everyone needs the whole kit and caboodle. You might just want something more focused. Hey, I'm concerned about lead in my pipes. Well, then get the essential test. That's all the metals. It'll tell you zinc, copper, lead, arsenic, and so forth. If you're particularly concerned about smells, like if you're noticing smells, if you think there's a microbial issue and you're like, God, isn't the chlorine supposed to get rid of microbes? You do the advanced, check the chlorine levels. What are the THM levels? So we package them in such a way that you're always getting more. And depending on your budget, you can hopefully find a way to specifically get what you need. And you get a report on the flip side when your results are done. We send you a kit in the mail. You follow the instructions. Every kit is different. You follow the instructions, and then maybe 5 days later, you get the results emailed to you. And the report, as you just scrolled through, is pretty clear. It tells you, hey, what was found?
Right.
What do these levels compare like? So are they higher than the regulatory limit? Are they higher than the health goal, but lower than a regulatory limit? Are they non-detect? Nothing to worry about at all? How do you filter them out? Is it a big risk, a small risk? Is this affecting taste or smell or odor? The report is pretty thorough, and it'll really do that job of translating the dry chemistry into something, what we hope anyone can understand.
Okay, awesome. So this says it does include some volatile organic compounds. Would this include some of the ones we talked about with the rodenticides, do you think?
It might. I don't know if it includes the particular rodenticide. This one, I don't know if it does. I'd have to check. I don't think it does. No, because these things are so rare in city water, it wouldn't be included, and you would add that on as a specialized test.
Okay,
The
there was an
well
add-on
test,
section.
yeah. The well tests do include a lot more semi-volatiles, because if you have a private well, nobody's looking after it other than you. And so it's a slightly more comprehensive package as a result, because it's much more likely to find semi-volatiles and weird industrial runoff in somebody's well than it is in the city water, because for many people, the city water goes through a system of filtration and treatment and monitoring and observation. And while that can go wrong sometimes, by and large, it doesn't.
Okay. So if someone like Pamela wanted to call, she could call in or use the chat to be like, hey, I'm concerned about this particular thing. where is that in this lineup?
Yep, and we even have a tool also, like on the Go Simple. If you go to gosimplelab.com, so TapScore is a brand that we manage. It is a water testing version of our product, but like, for a second, behind the scenes, there's gosimplelab.com, and this is the kind of network of labs. If you go to the top, you say test. Nope, very top, sorry.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well,
My bad.
I'm back.
It opened a new window, so you have to go to the current window.
Okay, thank you. Test right here?
Mm-hmm. You can type in any contaminant
there. Gotcha. Okay, well, I don't know.
And it'll then,
but
yeah, so you could just type in arsenic, for example. Select arsenic.
Oh. Let me go back. Okay. Total arsenic.
And you can see all sorts of different tests that include arsenic in them. This is one way to just quickly review all the tests and what's included in the various test packages.
Awesome. Okay, well, that was really helpful. Yeah, so maybe people can like customize a little bit based on where they are, what they're concerned about. I did see you recommend water systems. That's fantastic. That's really taking a lot of questions away from me. So that's nice. It sounds like you're kind of matching systems for the problem. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. So maybe I can perhaps close on this or some. I didn't understand until I was looking at your website that volatile organic compounds could be in water. I thought they were always airborne. So maybe you can even just kind of explain, since you have this great background, just give us like a little lesson on kind of water chemistry and how things get sort of stuck in our water that we get exposed to.
Well, so volatile organic chemistry is interesting because you're right, it changes phase easily and it wants to evaporate. The common example is like these chlorine compounds, these trihalomethanes, which are always under the spotlight because they're in all municipal water that's treated with chlorine. Chlorine interacts with organic matter. That compound sometimes is a trihalomethane that gets created, and it's a volatile organic compound. So it will have a tendency to become a gas and volatilize out, like evaporation kind of. So depending on, so if you turn on your faucet, so in the pipe, that chemistry, there's things like pressure and temperature, which will dictate how quickly a chemical will volatilize. You turn up the heat on your water, things volatilize much faster. You cool it down, things volatilize more slowly. You add pressure, you add other chemicals, you can change the likelihood of something volatilizing. And when you're smelling water and it smells like chlorine, well, you're smelling the volatile compounds effectively boiling off the water. And so VOCs are often in a dissolved state in the water, but the moment it comes out of your tap and is introduced to the air, it can volatilize. It's going to have much more difficulty volatilizing in the pipes, especially when it's moving through the distribution system, right? It has to, in that situation, it has to both volatilize through the water and out through the pipe, and then out through the soil, right? Like it's just not. Where it really volatilizes is when it comes out of the tap.
Because or your shower, I would imagine, like even worse. Okay.
Yep. You've changed the pressure, you've changed the temperature, you've introduced air. All of these things will promote volatilization. Shower is another great example. You sometimes in homes, in older homes, you turn up the hot water, you can start to smell it. And it's usually because hot water is, promoting the volatilization of certain gases that are maybe complex with metals or complex with other minerals, and then you can smell them. But if you were to freeze them, bring them down really low temperature, you wouldn't smell it as much because they're not being pushed out of the water by the heat. They're not being volatilized.
Okay. So that helped me understand it. So it's sort of almost like the potential for those VOCs to come out and be exposed while you're using your water.
Yeah, it's kind of like gasoline too. I mean, you go to the gas stations, certainly there the gasoline is in liquid form, but you can also smell it, and you spill some on the ground and you dries up really quickly. It's volatilizing super quickly.
Yeah, for sure.
It's evaporating.
Well, I have to say, I moved into a new house about a year ago, and I should have gone on your chat because I really wasn't sure what to test. Like I was out of curiosity. I sort of wanted to know a lot. I wanted to know, about pesticides and different pharmaceutical residue, but I didn't quite know. Maybe you can use me as an example. I live in suburban Phoenix. I think my water system here is fairly new, actually, compared to maybe where you live. I looked at my city water report. We do have arsenic in the area, but it seemed like from the report everything looked good. I was feeling fatigued, and I just was trying to think about everything, and I was like, well, this new house doesn't have any filter. So I ended up, and I did think about where my sink is and this and that. So I ended up getting a whole house filter. Having some experience using water filtration in my home, I had at least some sense of what kind of thing I wanted. But I didn't test, to be honest. And now I kind of regret it from this conversation. But, I'll probably move again. What kind of testing would you recommend for someone like me in like a new suburb?
Generally speaking, the most popular test, and for good reason, for a city water connected home is the advanced city water test, because it has all the chlorine and organics, the metals, the minerals, the general chemistry.
Okay.
If you have a well, we actually say do the essential well. Not every well is contaminated with rodenticide and crazy things. In fact, most of them are not. So for the well people, we say it's more important to test the microbes with the essential well test, metals, minerals, microbes. For the city water connected people, which is most people in this country, about I think like 200 million people or so are on city water, probably more. This advanced city is perfect. That's exactly what it's built for. It's going to give you fluoride. It's going to give you all the metals, arsenic, lead, copper, lithium, salts, and you'll get a full characterization pretty much similar to what the utility is required to do, if not a little bit more. So with that, with that in mind, I think that's probably the best test.
Okay. So I kind of understand the top ones. These VOCs, what like types of products are they originating from? Like the piping or yeah.
Usually it's the chlorine. For
Okay.
a city water system, it's going to be the chlorination, or if someone has installed a filter incorrectly in the plumbing, or they've got weird plastic pipe issues, they'll pop up in weird ways. For cities, it's mostly looking at chlorine related VOCs because they hit every time.
Wow. Okay.
For wells, you might see like propanes and benzenes, and maybe there's a kind of nearby waste issue. You hear things like TCE and triethylbenzene and triethyltoluene and all these different VOCs, which are really not going to be likely in your municipal water unless it's a very small town or the town is having major issues, but would be in a private well because nobody's looking after. No one's checking to see if the neighbor is dumping something, or if the laundromat down the street is having an issue, or the airport nearby, right? So you get weirder things in the well water.
Okay. Pamela was asking about fluoride, but it looks like it's here. Fluoride levels in the water will be indicated. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I have a client who is on a well in Iowa, and it's kind of might be interesting to you. So she did testing, urine testing for chemicals, and she's definitely high in glyphosate and is showing different like mitochondrial damage. She had other like toxicants too in there. But she said she tested her well water. Well, she tested maybe more other things, but she showed me the report on glyphosate, and it was like clean as a whistle. I was shocked. She said it's very deep, and she felt like that was why it was clean. Yeah, I was surprised. Does that not surprise you?
A lot.
Okay.
Well, the deeper well will generally. Remember, we were talking about how like contaminants have to pass, through the sun and the soil to get to the water. And so in that process they touch other chemistry, they touch microbes, they get hit by UV rays, and they can transform. The
Okay.
more of a distance there is between the source, whether it's a laundromat and your well, the better. Because it might just be that this toxic thing coming out of the laundromat, by the time it hits your well, it's been eaten apart and it's no longer toxic.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it definitely glyphosate microbes can break down glyphosate, different like yeast and stuff. So that's interesting. You know, it was interesting to me to have that report, to have both the reports, because if we had just seen her water, I'd say, oh, you look good, but we saw her urine and some markers of like mitochondrial health, and it didn't look good. And I've been surprised in general, because my clients are usually pretty health conscious, what they're peeing out. So, and some of them do have nice water systems, and she's testing her well water. Other people have reverse osmosis. So I just kind of showed me the water isn't the only source. I think there's a lot in the air. We'll have to get some air specialists on here. I mean, because people are trying to eat organic and but they're getting exposed. So maybe it's things can still rainwater onto organic crops. I know there in California, you guys, not you personally, but they're using fracking wastewater to like, you know, water organic crops. So we're definitely getting exposed in like myriad of ways, or I wouldn't be seeing it on these test results of my health conscious clients. It's really disturbing.
It's frustrating when you can't find the cause of something as well. So I think like a lot of the good value that comes out of what you work on is trying to identify that, because I think that's usually where the medical office stops short.
Yeah. But sometimes even now we run these tests with people, it's hard to say where exactly it came from. Like they're getting exposed to, you know, and I'm not a chemist, so they're getting exposed to perc or this or that. And it will list, you know, could be from jet fuel residue or this or that. But I mean, I think we're all exposed to jet fuel residue, is from what I'm getting from watching these tests. But some of the other ones, it is hard to say. And all I can say is like, let's talk about any potential things. Let's keep an eye out for any, you know, things you missed in the home. But just keep detoxing like all the time. Like we just kind of all need to kind of keep it. It's like the soil is a filter, but we're a filter too. And we just have to kind of keep optimizing our own filter, in my opinion, because we're going to keep getting exposed. I think having a water system is a great investment. I think this testing you're doing is a great investment because we need it. And that, just keep in mind, that's just one of the sources, I guess I would say.
Yeah, you know, something like from our standpoint, it's like, is water going to explain every condition out there? Absolutely not. But it's like over the course of your life, one of those things you should have some awareness of at some point. And especially if you're going to live in a house for 20, 30 years and raise a family in that house, you might as well check, right? And while your water quality will change, and we get this all the time, people say, oh, I did it last year and my results were different. And we say, well, yeah, it's a natural system. The water comes from a cycle that is constantly introducing new contaminants into it and taking other contaminants out. It's not that, you know, the water is going to be the same every day, every year, every minute. It's a natural system. And so what you do get out of a water test is a good indication of what are the big issues, what are not the issues. You know, and so while most people will do a water test and half of them will get information back that kind of validates what they already thought, a big chunk of them will see something totally surprising in left field. And you know, even if that's just 25, 30%, that's 25 or 30% who would have spent 20 years drinking that water, not aware of that, because most things don't smell, most things don't have taste. Does that mean you're going to get sick and die? Absolutely not. But it's just, you might as well get rid of it. You might as well reduce the chance that this trace contaminant will impact you.
Yeah, that's a great point about the longevity of how long you're going to be somewhere. That is a factor. Just like when you're deciding, I do a lot of work in toxic mold. It's like whether you stay or go or what you're going to spend money on depends on kind of how long you're going to be there. So if you're just in a rental and you know it's not forever, just maybe a countertop filtration thing is enough. But yeah, if you're investing in building a home or, you know, staying in a home a long time, you're definitely going to want to know what you're getting into. So thank you for that point. Thank you for all your time. and the expertise. Is there anything we missed that you want to hit before we go here?
No, I'm thrilled to have been part of this and happy to chat again anytime it's helpful.
And can you tell me that other website again? Not my caps for the other one.
GoSimpleLab.com.
GoSimpleLab.com. Okay. So if you want to use that tool that we showed there, that's GoSimpleLab.com. And then at mytapscore.com, we've got this code for 15% off. It's my last name. It's Danner, and it's good through Halloween. So you can get your costume on, test your water. As long as you do it by Halloween, you're good to go. Thank you so much. I really just appreciate this research you're bringing out into the world and like taking the time to educate my community. The way this interview can live on as people continue to have questions. So thanks again.
Thank you, Bridget.
We'll see you guys next week. Yeah. Bye-bye, everybody.